The courtroom was silent in a way that felt unnatural, like the air itself had learned to hold its breath. Even the old ceiling fan above the jury box seemed to hesitate between rotations, its faint hum swallowed by the weight of what was about to happen. The bailiff cleared his throat. "Call your next witness." The prosecutor stood slowly, buttoning his jacket as if time itself had slowed for him. "The state calls Mateo Ramirez." A murmur rippled through the gallery, quick, sharp, then gone. Reporters leaned forward. A woman in the second row clasped her hands so tightly her knuckles turned white. On the defense bench, Elena Ramirez closed her eyes. 10 seconds passed. Then a small boy emerged from the side door. Mateo Ramirez was 10 years old, but he looked younger as he crossed the polished courtroom floor alone. His shoulders were narrow, his steps uncertain. He wore sneakers with untied laces and a button-up shirt that was clearly too big for him, the sleeves rolled twice at the cuffs. The fabric hung off him stiffly, ironed with care. His feet didn't reach the ground when he climbed into the witness chair. They dangled there, swinging slightly, back and forth. The bailiff knelt beside him and spoke softly, explaining the oath in words Mateo could understand. Mateo nodded, his eyes fixed not on the judge, not on the jury, but on the woman sitting at the defense table. His mother. Elena sat handcuffed between her attorney and a deputy. Her hair was pulled back neatly, though a few strands had escaped and clung to her damp cheeks. She hadn't slept. That was clear. Dark circles hollowed her eyes, and when Mateo looked at her, her lips parted as if she wanted to speak, but no sound came out. Mateo's small hand was clenched tight around something. The prosecutor noticed. "What do you have there, son?" he asked gently. Mateo hesitated, then slowly opened his fist. It was a drawing. A crumpled piece of paper, creased and smoothed and creased again. Stick figures in thick pencil lines. One tall figure stood in front of two smaller ones, arms stretched wide. Behind them loomed a dark, shapeless shadow, scribbled so hard the pencil had nearly torn through the page. The prosecutor swallowed. "That's very nice," he said. "Did you draw that?" Mateo nodded. "Can you tell us what it means?" Mateo's fingers tightened again. He shook his head. The judge leaned forward slightly. "It's okay, Mateo. Just tell the truth. That's all we're asking." Mateo's chest rose and fell too quickly. He leaned toward the microphone, his voice barely above a whisper, but the sound cut through the courtroom like breaking glass. "Mommy didn't mean to kill him," he said. A collective gasp swept the room. Mateo's eyes never left his mother. "She was saving me." The judge's gavel hovered, forgotten in his hand. And, just like that, everything changed. 2 months earlier, the kitchen smelled like rain and burnt oil. Elena Ramirez stood at the stove, her back stiff, her shoulders aching from a 12-hour shift at Mercy General. The skillet sizzled angrily beneath her hand as she tried to scrape blackened chicken from the pan. Outside, rain hammered against the windows in uneven bursts, the kind that rattled nerves. Behind her, the front door slammed. She flinched. Marco was home. She could tell how drunk he was by the way his footsteps sounded, heavy, uneven, impatient. Bottles clinked as he dropped his keys on the counter. "Smells like shit," Marco said. Elena said nothing. She focused on the pan. On the stove. On keeping her hands from shaking. "What is this?" he demanded, stepping closer. "Chicken," she said quietly. "I'll make something else." Marco laughed, sharp and humorless. "You always say that." From the hallway, 10-year-old Mateo watched, his body pressed flat against the wall. His sister Sophia crouched behind him, clutching his shirt with both hands. They had learned when to be quiet. They had learned when to disappear. Marco reached past Elena and grabbed the bottle of oil from the counter. It slipped from his fingers and shattered on the floor, glass and grease exploding outward. "Look at that," he sneered. "You can't even stand right without breaking something." "I'll clean it," Elena said. "Please. Just sit down." Marco's hand closed around something on the counter. The knife. Mateo felt his stomach drop. Elena, Marco said softly now, too softly. Turn around. She didn't. Marco stepped closer. The knife caught the kitchen light, a thin silver line. I said turn around. Mateo took a step forward without thinking. Marco raised the knife. She doesn't listen, Marco muttered. Always talking. Always talking. Elena's voice broke. Marco, not in front of the kids. Marco laughed again. Make me. Mateo screamed. Everything after that happened too fast and too slow at the same time. Elena turned. She saw the knife. She saw Mateo in the doorway. She reached blindly behind her, her hand closing around the heavy iron skillet, still warm from the stove. She swung once. The sound was awful. Marco fell. The knife clattered to the floor. For a moment, no one moved. Then Elena dropped the skillet and ran to her children, pulling them into her arms as Marco lay motionless behind her, blood pooling across the kitchen tiles. She didn't know he was dead. She only knew he wasn't moving. The police arrived 8 minutes later. Red and blue lights flooded the house, flashing against the rain-soaked windows. Neighbors gathered under umbrellas. Someone whispered. Someone cried. Officer Daniels was the first inside. He saw the body, the blood, the skillet. He saw Elena on the floor with her children wrapped around her like anchors. She did it, someone outside said. She killed her husband. Elena didn't resist when they pulled her away. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just kept repeating the same words over and over, like a prayer she couldn't stop. He was going to kill me. Please. My kids. The handcuffs clicked shut. Mateo watched from the stairs as they took his mother away. He did not understand what murder meant. He only knew that the house felt empty in a way it never had before. By morning, the story was everywhere. Local nurse kills husband in domestic dispute. Former officer dead in home altercation. Marco's badge photo appeared on every screen. His friends spoke on camera about what a good man he had been. No one asked about the bruises Elena had hidden. No one asked why the children flinched when men raised their voices. At the station, Elena sat alone in an interrogation room that smelled like bleach and cold coffee. A detective slid photos across the table. The blood. The skillet. Marco's body. Why didn't you run? He asked. I couldn't, she whispered. My kids. You grabbed a weapon. I grabbed what was there. The detective leaned back. Sounds like anger to me. When the charges were read, second-degree murder, Elena felt something inside her finally break. Across town, Mateo sat in a child advocacy center, swinging his legs in a chair too big for him, holding a crumpled drawing in his hand. He drew the same picture again. And again. A big figure. 2 small ones. And a shadow that never quite went away. Back in the courtroom, the judge finally found his voice. Order, he said quietly. Order in the court. Mateo sat frozen on the stand, his words still hanging in the air. Elena stared at her son, tears streaming down her face, knowing, deep in her bones, that whatever happened next would be decided not by lawyers, not by laws, but by the truth a child was brave enough to speak. Elena met Marco Ramirez when she was 22 and still believed love could fix broken things. They met in the emergency department at County General, where she worked nights as a nursing assistant while finishing nursing school. Marco came in with a split eyebrow and a crooked grin, blood running down his face, joking with the triage nurse like he owned the place. Occupational hazard, he'd said. People don't like being arrested. Elena remembered thinking he looked tired more than tough. He asked for her name. He remembered it the next time he came in. He brought coffee. He listened when she talked about exams and exhaustion and the fear of never becoming more than the girl who worked doubles. Marco made her feel seen. In the beginning, he was careful, gentle, protective in a way that felt flattering. When they walked together at night, he always took the street side. When men stared, he stared back harder. Elena mistook control for safety. The first time he yelled, it startled her. They had been dating 6 months. She came home late from a shift, shoes in hand, trying not to wake him. He was sitting in the dark. "Where were you?" he asked. "At work," she said, confused. "You know my schedule." He didn't like her tone. That was what he said later. He apologized the next morning. Brought flowers. Cooked breakfast. Said stress was getting to him. Said she deserved better than his temper. She believed him. When the apologies stopped coming, she was already pregnant with Matteo. Marco insisted they get married quickly. "A real family," he said. "I won't let my kid grow up without a father." Elena ignored the small voice inside her that whispered at what cost. The abuse didn't arrive all at once. It crept in quietly, wearing the mask of concern. He didn't like her coworkers. Said male doctors were always looking. He didn't like her working nights. Said it wasn't safe. When she pushed back, he reminded her of his badge, of how dangerous the world really was. When Matteo was born, Marco cried harder than anyone. For a while, things were good. Then the drinking started. At first it was beers after work. Then whiskey. Then bottles hidden behind cereal boxes and under the sink. Marco came home later. Louder. Meaner. The first bruise appeared on Elena's arm when Matteo was 3. Marco said she startled him. She wore long sleeves. When Sophia was born, the house grew smaller. The walls seemed closer. Money was tighter. Marco had left the force after an internal investigation he never talked about. He said the department had betrayed him. Said everyone was against him. Elena learned to choose her words carefully. She learned not to argue. She learned that silence could be a shield, at least for a while. Matteo learned too. He learned how to read his father's footsteps. How to tell if Marco was drunk by the way the door closed. How to guide Sophia into the closet when voices got loud. He learned that mommy smiled differently when daddy was home. Sophia learned to cry without sound. Once, when Matteo was 7, Marco slapped Sophia across the head for spilling juice on the carpet. She cried so hard she vomited. The next morning, she didn't respond when Elena called her name. At the hospital, the doctor said it was temporary. A concussion. But the word temporary didn't make it feel better. That night, Elena packed a bag. She stood by the front door with Matteo holding Sophia's hand, her heart pounding so loud she thought Marco would hear it. Then Marco knelt in front of her. "I didn't mean it," he said, crying. "I don't know what's wrong with me." He promised therapy, sobriety, change. Elena unpacked the bag. She hated herself for it. By the time Matteo turned 10, Elena lived in a constant state of calculation. How loud could she speak? How late could she work? How angry was Marco tonight? She documented bruises on her phone and deleted the photos the same night. She memorized the location of knives in the kitchen. She slept lightly, always listening. She told herself the children needed stability. She told herself she could handle it. Marco liked to remind her that no one would believe her. "Who do you think they'll side with?" he asked once, leaning close enough that she could smell alcohol on his breath. A cop or a tired nurse with a bad story? That was the night Matteo heard his mother crying in the bathroom for the first time. He sat outside the door until she stopped. The breaking point came quietly. It was a Tuesday. Rain threatened but never fell. Elena burned the chicken because her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Marco had been drinking since noon. When he picked up the knife, something inside Elena finally understood what her mind had been refusing to see for years. This wasn't another fight. This was the end. In jail, 2 days after the arrest, Elena replayed every decision she had ever made. The guard slid her food tray through the slot without looking at her. The walls smelled like bleach and despair. She pressed her forehead against the cold metal bed frame and thought about her children. She had failed them. That was the thought that hurt the most. Her public defender visited her once, then disappeared. The private attorney her sister hired spoke carefully, like someone afraid of saying the wrong thing. "The state's angle," he explained, "is that you had options. I didn't, Elena said. He nodded, but his eyes didn't fully believe her. Across town, Matteo sat in a foster home with strangers who spoke too softly and watched him too closely. Sophia slept with the lights on. Matteo drew. He drew his mother standing between them and the dark shape that wore his father's face. He drew over the shadow again and again, pressing the pencil until the tip snapped. At night, he replayed the sound of the skillet hitting bone. He wondered if he should have screamed louder. By the time the trial date was set, Elena understood something she hadn't before. Silence had not protected them. It had only delayed the damage. And now, the truth, the one she had buried for years, would have to come out in the worst possible place, under the harshest possible light. In a courtroom, with her son watching, the rain started just before Marco came home. Not the gentle kind. The kind that struck the roof in sharp, uneven bursts, like fingers tapping too hard on a door that wasn't opening fast enough. Elena noticed it while standing at the stove, staring at the pan long after the chicken had begun to burn. The smell crept up slowly, bitter and oily, curling in her throat. She should have turned the heat down. She should have thrown the chicken away. She didn't. Her hands were shaking again. She wiped them on her scrubs, though she hadn't worn scrubs since the morning. 12 hours on her feet. 2 codes. 1 patient who didn't make it. Death still clung to her, invisible but heavy. From the hallway came the soft sound of a cartoon playing. Matteo sat cross-legged on the floor, pretending to watch. Sophia leaned against him, her thumb in her mouth. They both stiffened when the front door handle rattled. Elena heard it too. The lock turned. The door opened. Marco's footsteps entered the house like a warning bell. Too heavy. Too fast. Elena closed her eyes for half a second. Please let him be tired, she thought. Please let him go to sleep. The door slammed shut. No such luck. What the hell is that smell? Marco's voice cut through the house, sharp and slurred at the same time. He tossed his keys onto the counter. They skidded, hit the wall, fell to the floor. Elena. She didn't answer right away. She turned off the stove slowly, carefully, like sudden movement might shatter something fragile inside her. It's chicken, she said. I'll make something else. Marco laughed. That laugh. Matteo felt it in his stomach before his ears caught up. He glanced down the hallway toward the kitchen, his heart already racing. He reached back without looking and pulled Sophia closer. Marco stumbled into the kitchen, rain still dripping from his jacket. He swayed slightly as he leaned against the counter. Chicken, he repeated, mocking. You've been home all day and this is what you make? I worked, Elena said quietly. Marco's eyes narrowed. You always say that. He stepped closer. Too close. Elena could smell the alcohol now, sharp and sour. Her fingers curled around the edge of the counter. I said I'll make something else, she repeated. Marco reached for the bottle of oil beside the stove. His hand knocked it over instead. The bottle shattered on the tile. Oil spread across the floor, shimmering under the kitchen light. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Marco exploded. Look at this, he shouted. You can't do anything right. Elena bent down instinctively, grabbing paper towels. I'll clean it. Marco kicked the paper towels out of her hand. Get up. Matteo moved before he realized what he was doing. 1 step into the hallway. Then another. Daddy, he called. Marco turned. His eyes landed on Matteo. Get back in your room. Matteo froze. Sophia whimpered behind him. Marco's gaze shifted back to Elena, who was still crouched on the floor, oil soaking into her knees. I'm sick of this, Marco said, his voice dropping. Sick of you acting like I'm the problem. Elena slowly stood. Marco, she said. The kids. His hand closed around the knife. It was sudden. Casual. Like he'd done it 100 times before. The blade caught the light. Matteo felt his chest seize. Elena's breath hitched. Turn around, Marco said. No, she whispered. I said turn around. She didn't move. Marco stepped closer. I'll make you stop talking, he muttered. Once and for all. Mateo screamed. It was loud. Raw. It tore out of him before he could stop it. That sound snapped something in Elena. She turned. She saw the knife raised. She saw Mateo standing there, small and helpless, eyes wide with terror. Time slowed. Elena's hand reached back blindly. Her fingers wrapped around cold iron. The skillet. She swung. She didn't aim. She didn't think. She just swung with everything she had left. The sound was not like in movies. It was dull. Wet. Final. Marco fell backward, his body hitting the floor hard enough to rattle the cabinets. The knife slipped from his hand, clattering across the tile. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Sophia screamed. Elena dropped the skillet. It hit the floor with a clang that echoed through the house. She rushed to her children, pulling them into her arms, her body shaking violently. Don't look, she whispered. Don't look. Marco lay still behind them. Blood spread beneath his head, dark and fast. Elena, he whispered. She froze. He didn't move again. The 911 call lasted 2 minutes and 43 seconds. Elena barely remembered making it. My husband, he was going to kill me, she sobbed. Please. Please send help. My kids are here. The operator told her to put the knife down. It's on the floor, Elena said. I didn't. Sirens approached before she finished the sentence. Mateo sat on the stairs, rocking Sophia back and forth. He stared at the kitchen floor, at the blood creeping closer to the bottom step. He didn't know why, but he started counting. 1, 2, 3. By the time he reached 30, the police were inside the house. They pulled Elena away from the children first. She didn't fight. She didn't scream. She just kept looking back at Mateo. Watch your sister, she told him. I love you. The handcuffs closed around her wrists. The sound was loud. Final. Mateo watched his mother disappear through the front door. The rain washed the blood on the driveway away. Inside the house, the smell of burnt chicken lingered long after everything else was gone. Later, much later, Elena would realize something. She had survived the night. But the night would never leave her. The house didn't feel like a home anymore. By dawn, yellow tape sealed it shut. The rain had stopped, leaving the air thick and sour. Neighbors stood in clusters across the street, whispering behind coffee cups and folded arms. Someone filmed with a phone. Someone else cried, though Mateo couldn't tell who. He sat in the back of a patrol car with Sophia curled against his side, her face buried in his jacket. A female officer handed him a juice box and spoke softly, the way adults do when they're afraid of saying the wrong thing. Your aunt is on her way, she said. Mateo nodded, though he wasn't sure which aunt she meant. He stared straight ahead, watching officers move in and out of the house like strangers rifling through memories. Inside, detectives photographed everything. The skillet. The blood spatter. The knife on the floor. They measured distances. They bagged evidence. They spoke in neutral tones that made what had happened sound smaller than it was. No one asked Mateo what he had seen. Not yet. Elena's interrogation room was windowless and too bright. The chair was bolted to the floor. The table was scarred with initials carved by people who had sat there before her, people who had also believed, once, that telling the truth would be enough. Detective Harlan sat across from her. Mid-40s. Calm. His partner leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Elena, Harlan said, sliding a cup of water toward her. We just want to understand. She nodded numbly. You and your husband argued, he said. He threatened me. You grabbed a skillet. It was there. You hit him in the head. She swallowed. I didn't mean. But you did. Harlan folded his hands. Why didn't you run? My kids were there. You could have grabbed them. He was between us. Harlan leaned back. The thing is, Elena, people in fear usually swing more than once. She stared at him. I wasn't angry, she said. I was terrified. He didn't write that down. When she asked about her children, Harlan avoided her eyes. "They're safe," he said. "For now." That word landed hard. By noon, Marco Ramirez was dead in every official sense of the word. The coroner listed cause of death: blunt force trauma to the skull. Time of death: approximately 9:14 p.m. Elena was transferred to county jail before she could change out of her blood-stained clothes. At booking, a deputy asked her occupation. "Nurse," she said. The deputy raised an eyebrow. "Guess you should have known better." The cell door slammed shut. The news cycle moved fast. By evening, Marco's photo was everywhere, his academy portrait, clean-cut and smiling. Headlines called him a former officer and devoted father. A former partner spoke about his struggles and demons, careful not to mention violence. Elena's name came with a mugshot. Her tired face. Her hollow eyes. No one mentioned the emergency room visits. The bruises. The silence. The district attorney's office issued a statement before Elena even saw a lawyer. Based on the evidence, this was not a clear case of self-defense. Those words echoed in her head that night as she lay on a thin mattress, staring at the ceiling, listening to other women cry. Mateo and Sofia were placed with a temporary foster family. The house smelled like lemon cleaner and unfamiliar food. The woman who ran it smiled too much. The man avoided eye contact. Sofia wet the bed the first night. Mateo didn't sleep at all. Every sound made him sit up. Every shadow looked like it might move. A social worker came the next morning with forms and a calm voice. "Mateo," she said, "we're going to ask you some questions about what happened." He tightened his grip on Sofia's hand. "Is Mommy coming back?" Sofia asked. The woman hesitated. Mateo answered for her. "She didn't mean it," he said. The woman wrote something down. Elena met her public defender 3 days later. His name was Alan Weiss. He looked exhausted. He apologized before he even sat down. "They're charging you with second-degree murder," he said gently. Elena felt the room tilt. "I saved my children," she said. He nodded. "I know. But the state's argument is going to be that you had time to retreat. That you chose force." He had a knife. There were no defensive wounds on him. He didn't get the chance. Weiss sighed. He was a former cop. That explained everything. The arraignment lasted 12 minutes. Elena stood in chains while the charges were read. The judge's voice was neutral, practiced. Bail was set higher than Elena could ever afford. When she looked back, she saw Mateo sitting behind a woman she barely recognized, her sister Anna. His face was pale. His eyes were too old. She tried to smile at him. He didn't smile back. By the time the indictment came down, the narrative was set. A stressed nurse. A heated argument. A fatal decision. The system didn't have room for years of fear or children hiding in closets. Those details were inconvenient. In the jail library, Elena found a book on domestic violence. She didn't read it. She pressed it against her chest and cried silently, shoulders shaking, finally understanding something that came too late. Surviving abuse did not mean surviving the aftermath. Across town, Mateo sat at a small desk in his foster room, drawing. He drew the courtroom this time. A big room. A small chair. Himself sitting alone, legs dangling, holding the truth in his hands. He didn't know it yet, but soon, the system that had taken his mother away would ask him to speak. And when it did, there would be no hiding. The courtroom filled slowly, like a theater before a show no one wanted to see. Potential jurors sat stiffly in rows, clutching summons letters and paper cups of coffee. Some avoided looking at Elena altogether. Others stared too long. The room smelled faintly of old wood, disinfectant, and nerves. Elena stood when instructed, hands cuffed, eyes forward. She told herself to breathe. Jury selection took 2 days. The prosecution dismissed anyone who mentioned domestic violence too easily. The defense fought to keep teachers, nurses, anyone who understood fear that didn't leave bruises in neat places. By the end, 12 strangers sat in the jury box. 12 people who would decide whether Elena Ramirez was a survivor or a murderer. Opening statements began on a Monday. The prosecutor, James Holloway, moved with confidence. Mid-40s. Impeccably groomed. Calm in the way of someone used to being believed. This case, he began, is not about sympathy. It's about choices. He walked slowly in front of the jury. On the night of April 12th, the defendant made a choice. She chose not to retreat. She chose not to call for help. She chose to pick up a heavy iron skillet and strike her husband in the head with enough force to kill him. He paused. The state will show you this was not self-defense. It was an act of uncontrolled anger. Elena felt her attorney shift beside her. Holloway gestured toward the gallery. There were children present. And yet, the defendant escalated the situation instead of de-escalating it. A woman on the jury frowned. That was enough. The defense opening was quieter. Elena's attorney, Rachel Moore, stood without theatrics. She didn't pace. She didn't raise her voice. Elena Ramirez did not wake up that morning planning to kill anyone, she said. She woke up planning to survive. She spoke about fear that accumulates. About danger that doesn't announce itself with a single blow. When someone is holding a knife, Moore said, you don't get to pause and debate legal theory. She looked directly at the jury. You will hear from a child who saw everything. Holloway objected immediately. Sustained, the judge said. The jury will disregard that last remark. But the seed had been planted. The first witnesses were clean. Too clean. A neighbor testified that they never heard anything unusual. A former colleague of Marco's described him as strict but fair. He loved his kids, the man said. He just had a temper. Holloway nodded, satisfied. The medical examiner explained the cause of death in clinical language. No emotion. No context. Just measurements and force and physics. Elena Ramirez is 5'4", Holloway said. Marco Ramirez was 6 feet tall. 200 pounds. The implication hung in the air. When Elena took the stand, the courtroom seemed to shrink. She held her hands together to keep them from shaking. Rachel Moore guided her gently at first, background, work history, her children. Then came the abuse. Elena spoke slowly, choosing words like fragile glass. She described nights hiding in the bathroom. Bruises she couldn't explain at work. The knife that glinted under the kitchen light. I was afraid, she said. Not for myself. For my kids. On cross-examination, Holloway was surgical. Why didn't you leave sooner? I tried. No police reports? No. No restraining orders? No. So nothing on record, he said, spreading his hands. Just your word. He leaned closer. Isn't it true you were angry that night? Elena shook her head. I was terrified. You grabbed a weapon. I grabbed what was there. You hit him in the head. Yes. Hard enough to kill him. Silence. Yes, she whispered. Holloway nodded, as if that settled everything. During recess, Elena sat alone in a holding room, staring at her hands. She wondered if she had already lost. In the gallery, Mateo sat between his aunt and a victim advocate. His legs bounced uncontrollably. He watched strangers talk about his family like it was a puzzle they could solve. When his mother returned to the courtroom, he stood up without realizing it. The bailiff gently pressed him back into his seat. At the end of the day, Holloway stood again. The state calls its next witness, he said. He looked toward the side door. Mateo Ramirez. The room went still. Elena's breath caught in her throat. Rachel Moore's hand tightened on her arm. No, Elena whispered. Mateo stood. He smoothed down his too big shirt with trembling hands and walked toward the door that would lead him to the witness stand. Toward the truth. Elena Ramirez had saved lives. She had stood at hospital bedsides while machines screamed and families prayed. She had held pressure on wounds until her hands cramped, whispered comfort to strangers as their hearts failed beneath her palms. None of that prepared her for the witness stand. The bailiff removed her handcuffs before she took the oath. The metal felt lighter than the eyes on her back as she crossed the room. Each step echoed too loudly, her shoes tapping against the polished floor like a countdown. She sat. The chair felt unstable, as if it might tip with one wrong movement. "Do you swear to tell the truth?" the clerk asked. "I do," Elena said. Her voice surprised her. It didn't shake. Not yet. Rachel Moore approached first, a thin file in her hand, her tone measured. "Elena," she said, "how long were you married to Marco Ramirez?" 11 years. "And during those 11 years, did your relationship change?" Elena nodded. "Yes." "Can you explain how?" Elena took a breath. The courtroom seemed to lean forward with her. "He became angry more often," she said. "Drank more. Everything felt unpredictable." "Did he ever hurt you?" The word hurt landed heavily. "Yes." "How?" Elena stared at the edge of the witness stand. "He pushed me, grabbed me, slapped me." "Did he ever threaten you?" Her throat tightened. "Yes." "Did he ever threaten your children?" A pause. "Yes." A murmur moved through the gallery. Rachel let the silence do its work before continuing. "On the night of April 12th, what did you believe would happen if you didn't act?" Elena's hands clenched together. "I believed he would kill me," she said. "And then my children would be alone with him." Rachel nodded slowly. No further questions. James Holloway stood immediately. He didn't rush. He straightened his cuffs, took a sip of water, and approached like a man walking into familiar territory. "Mrs. Ramirez," he said pleasantly, "you work in healthcare, correct?" "Yes." "So you're trained to remain calm under pressure?" "I try to be." "You're trained to assess risk?" "Yes." "And yet, on this night, you claim you had no choice." Elena met his eyes. "That's correct." He smiled slightly. "Let's talk about your choices." He began pacing. "You never filed a police report." "No." "You never sought a restraining order." "No." "You never told a doctor your injuries were caused by abuse." "No." "So there is no documentation," Holloway said, stopping in front of her. "Just your memory." Elena swallowed. "Yes." Holloway tilted his head. "Isn't it true you stayed because you needed his income?" "No." "Because you were afraid of being alone?" "No." "Because you were angry?" "No." Holloway's voice sharpened. "Isn't it true that you picked up a weapon instead of running?" "I didn't have time." "You had seconds." "He had a knife." "You had a door." "He was between me and my children." Holloway stepped closer. "You hit him in the head." "Yes." "With an iron skillet." "Yes." "Hard enough to fracture his skull." Elena's voice dropped. "Yes." "Once." "Yes." "No struggle." "No." "No defensive wounds." "No." Holloway nodded slowly, turning to the jury. "Nothing further." Elena remained seated, breathing shallowly. The judge dismissed her. As she stepped down, her knees buckled slightly. Rachel caught her elbow. In the holding room, Elena collapsed onto a bench, her hands shaking uncontrollably now. "I told the truth," she whispered. Rachel knelt in front of her. "You did," she said. "That doesn't mean they heard it." That night in her cell, Elena replayed every word. She wondered if she should have cried more, if she should have screamed, if pain needed to look a certain way to be believed. Across town, Mateo lay awake in his foster bed, staring at the ceiling. He had listened to his mother's testimony through headphones in the child advocacy room. He had heard strangers dissect her fear. He clenched his fists under the blanket. They were saying things that weren't true. They were saying his mother was angry. She wasn't. She was scared. Mateo sat up suddenly. "I have to tell them," he whispered into the dark. The next morning, the courtroom filled again. Holloway stood. "The state calls its final witness," he said. "Mateo Ramirez." Elena's heart stopped. The courtroom went silent before Mateo even entered. It was the kind of silence that pressed against the ears, thick and expectant, as if everyone sensed that whatever happened next could not be undone. The side door opened. Mateo Ramirez stepped inside. He wore the same oversized button-up shirt he had worn the first day of trial, his father's old shirt, ironed too carefully by his aunt that morning. The collar sat crooked on his neck. His sneakers squeaked faintly against the floor with each step. He walked alone. Elena felt something tear inside her chest. She half stood, instinctively, before Rachel more gently pressed her back into the chair. "Don't," Rachel whispered. "Let him see you calm." Mateo climbed onto the witness stand. The chair swallowed him. His feet dangled above the floor, swinging slightly, back and forth, back and forth. The bailiff knelt beside him. "Do you know what it means to tell the truth?" she asked softly. Mateo nodded. "It means you don't lie," he said. "Even if you're scared." The bailiff swallowed and stepped away. James Holloway approached slowly, deliberately lowering himself into a crouch a few feet from the stand so he wouldn't tower over the boy. "Hi, Mateo," he said gently. "Do you remember me?" Mateo nodded again. "I just want you to answer my questions the best you can, okay?" Mateo's eyes flicked to his mother for half a second. Elena gave him a small nod, her lips pressed together to keep from shaking. "Yes," Mateo said. "Do you know why we're here today?" Mateo thought about it. "Because Daddy's gone," he said, "and Mommy's in trouble." A few jurors shifted in their seats. Holloway nodded sympathetically. "That's right. Can you tell us what happened the night your father died?" Mateo's hands tightened in his lap. "There was yelling," he said. "Like always." "Always," Holloway repeated lightly. Mateo nodded. "When Daddy drank." Holloway paused, then continued. "What happened next?" Mateo swallowed. "Daddy was mad about dinner." A faint ripple of recognition moved through the room. "He knocked stuff over," Mateo said. "Mommy told him to stop." And then, Mateo's voice grew quieter. "He grabbed the knife." Elena closed her eyes. Holloway's tone remained even. "Are you sure about that?" "Yes," Mateo said, suddenly louder. "I saw it." "What did your mother do?" "She said not in front of us," Mateo replied. "She was crying." "Did she hit your father?" Mateo hesitated. "Yes." Holloway leaned in. "Did she hit him first?" Mateo shook his head. "No." The word echoed louder than Mateo intended. "No," he repeated. "Daddy was gonna hurt her." Holloway straightened slightly. "How do you know that?" Mateo's composure cracked. "Because he said he was gonna make her stop talking forever." A sharp intake of breath rippled through the courtroom. Holloway's jaw tightened. "Mateo," he said carefully, "sometimes when people are scared, they misunderstand things." "I didn't misunderstand," Mateo said. "How can you be sure?" Mateo looked directly at him, eyes wet but steady. "Because I was scared too." Rachel Moore rose before Holloway could continue. "Permission to approach," she asked the judge. The judge nodded. Rachel knelt in front of Mateo, meeting him at eye level. "Mateo," she said softly, "do you remember the drawing you made?" Mateo nodded. "Can you tell the jury about it?" Mateo reached into his pocket and pulled out the crumpled paper. He held it up. "I draw when I'm scared," he said. "This is Mommy." He pointed to the tall stick figure. "And this is me and Sophia." He pointed to the two smaller ones. "And that's the bad part," he said, pointing to the dark shadow. "Daddy was like that when he drank." Rachel's voice barely carried. "What was Mommy doing in the picture?" "She was standing in front of us." Rachel swallowed. "Why?" "So we wouldn't get hurt." Holloway stood again, his voice tighter now. "Mateo," he said, "your mother used a weapon that night." Mateo frowned. "Daddy had a knife. But your mother chose something heavy. Something dangerous." Mateo's small hands clenched. "She didn't choose," he said. "She grabbed it so he'd stop." "Stop what?" "Hurting us." Holloway exhaled sharply. "Did your father ever hurt you?" Mateo nodded. "Can you be specific?" Mateo glanced toward the jury. "He hit Sophia," he said. "Once." "She couldn't hear me the next day." The courtroom shifted. "And your mother?" Holloway asked. "She always took it," Mateo said. "So we wouldn't." That was when Mateo broke. His shoulders started shaking. Tears spilled freely down his face. I tried to help, he sobbed. I screamed. I thought if I screamed loud enough. His voice collapsed into itself. I thought maybe he'd stop. Elena stood. The judge began to speak, but before anyone could stop him, Mateo slid off the witness stand. He crossed the space between them in 3 small steps and wrapped his arms around his mother's waist. I'm sorry, he cried into her shirt. I'm sorry I couldn't stop it. The courtroom erupted not with noise, but with soundless grief. Jurors wiped their eyes. The bailiff turned away. Even the judge's hand trembled as he brought the gavel down. Recess, the judge said hoarsely. 5 minutes. When court resumed, something fundamental had shifted. Holloway no longer met Elena's eyes. The jury sat differently now, no longer detached, no longer distant. They had seen the truth. Not the legal truth. The human one. That afternoon, the state rested. Quietly. Without argument. The courtroom smelled faintly of old wood, ink, and something else, something heavier. Anticipation, grief, relief. The air was electric, thick with unsaid words. Elena sat at the defense table. Her hands were folded, fingers entwined. Her hair, pulled back neatly, clung damply to her neck. She did not look at the gallery. She did not look at the jury. She only looked at Mateo and Sofia, sitting a few rows back with their aunt. Mateo's small hand clutched the drawing he had left behind on the witness stand, now smoothed and slightly torn at the edges. The 4% of the jury stood. Have you reached a verdict? The judge asked. The jurors shuffled. The air was tense enough to choke on. Yes, Your Honor, the 4% said. We have. The judge nodded. Please hand the verdict to the bailiff. The bailiff stepped forward and carefully unfolded the paper. He handed it to the judge, whose glasses reflected the fluorescent lights above. The courtroom waited. The judge cleared his throat. How do you find the defendant on the charge of second-degree murder? A beat. The 4% read aloud, voice steady. Guilty of manslaughter, with time served and probation. All other charges are dismissed. A low, collective exhale swept the room. Elena's knees nearly buckled. She gripped the edge of the table, holding herself upright as tears ran silently down her cheeks. Rachel Moore leaned close. It's done. You're free. Free. The word was fragile in the air, almost impossible. 11 years of fear, 2 children, 1 night of survival, a lifetime of judgment, all condensed into those 2 words. Mateo stood immediately, running to her. Sofia followed. Elena rose slowly, her arms outstretched. Mateo climbed onto her first, wrapping himself around her waist, sobbing into her shirt. Sofia nestled next to them. The courtroom gallery seemed to vanish. There were no jurors, no cameras, no lawyers, just the 3 of them. Elena held them close, breathing them in. The shaking in her shoulders slowed. The weight that had pressed her down for months lifted slightly, as though some part of the universe had finally remembered she was human. The judge cleared his throat. This court has seen justice complicated by fear, love, and the choices of a child who witnessed too much. Let this verdict remind us that sometimes courage and protection, not violence or anger, define true responsibility. Outside the courtroom, reporters waited. Cameras flashed. People shouted questions. Elena ignored them. Mateo held her hand tightly. Sofia clung to her leg. They walked slowly, deliberately, into the sunlight that felt almost unreal after so many months of fluorescent courtroom lighting. At home, the house smelled the same, burnt chicken still lingering faintly, the faint metallic tang of memories, but it was theirs again. Mateo placed his drawing on the kitchen counter. This time, the dark shadow was gone. The tall stick figure's arms stretched wide, enclosing the 2 small ones. The lines were uneven, childish, yet perfect in meaning, safety, love, survival. Elena knelt beside her children. We'll heal, she whispered. Slowly. Together. Mateo nodded, small fingers gripping hers. Sofia rested her head against Elena's shoulder. In that quiet moment, The years of fear, silence, and survival crystallized into something fragile but real. They were a family, scarred but intact. And for the first time since that night, they could breathe again. If this story moved you, don't stay silent. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it so more people hear the voices that are often ignored. Justice begins when truth is heard.